Cleared AY for 9213, know that. Clear, got it.
Well everyone, it's that time of year again when schools take an annual break from classes for an entire week, otherwise known to students as spring break. This year's hiatus would host a 4-day trip to Central Georgia to see trains, enjoy the weather, and have a relaxing time doing what I love. I'd invite my friend Dakota as well, so he'd tag along with us for the trip, making for some welcomed company and a lot of fun and a lot of trains, which is the reason I'm splitting this trip into sections as there's so much to cover. So stay tuned for a couple more parts after this, as each day a new endeavor would begin. So it's northbound on I-75 to Valdosta on the cool sunny day of Sunday, March 12th, 2023. We drive north in the morning and arrive at our first location of the Valdosta Diamond just before noon. Showing up at the Diamond only minutes after our arrival would be NS Train 152, daily northbound freight from Valdosta's Langdale Yard to the massive terminal in Macon, about an 150-mile trip. Trailing second on today's 152 would be Union Pacific number 4952, an E&D SD70M that would split up the all-GE consist. This catch would be cool as me and Dakota had noticed that this engine had come down to Valdosta the day prior to our trip, and we were trying to track it as it came back north. In any case, that was easy. One train and already one of our goals met. Valdosta is a town that most people would know just from seeing it on the interstate signs as the first major town north of the Florida-Georgia border. While the traffic isn't what it used to be, a railroad diamond is situated in the heart of the town's industrial sector, where the NS's Macon District crosses the CSX's Thomasville sub at grade. A handful of trains pass here on each line daily, with the NS seeing the majority of the traffic, as the diamond is only a couple miles north of the railroad's Langdale Yard. Locals and freights can be spotted here, along with intermodal and manifest trains for Jacksonville. Both railroads serve interchange traffic for the small Valdosta Railroad, a Genesee and Wyoming-owned 14-mile short line starting here in Valdosta and running south to Clyattville, where a large paper mill and numerous industries provide the VR's customer base. After looking around and grabbing lunch in the area, we'd hear of a northbound NS train preparing to depart Langdale Yard, calling as 55V. We knew that the train would have to pass over the diamond just a couple miles north of the yard, so we stood strong at the interlocking.
Good afternoon, dispatcher. Read this 55V, over.
I read 55V, surprise train, over.
That's right. Well, we are ready to go north with a NS 9476, 9476, over.
All right, here comes some real estate. Holler if you need me, dispatcher out.
All right, thank you.
After a short conversation with the NS dispatcher, 55V would get signals to depart northbound, and in only minutes he was here, sporting a very interesting consist.
55V clear at the Y.
With an old Dash 9 leading, the NSF 742 would trail second, still in its original Santa Fe war bonnet paint that has been crudely relettered to read BNSF. These locomotives are becoming more and more rare, and to see one in South Georgia would be quite the treat. This 55V would leave at a good time, as I was hoping to chase an NS train all the way to Cordele, so back onto I-75 and north 13 miles to the small town of Hahira, where our grain train would roll next to the old GS&F brick depot under some of the darkest clouds I've ever seen. threat of bad weather would be made good as we jumped back into the car and drove into the town for some cover, as a pounding of hail would begin and all trains along the line would be mandated to come to a safe stop due to the county's tornado watch. However, in about 15 minutes, the weather would calm to a light rain, so we'd hop back on the highway up to a spot I had looked at on Google Maps about a week earlier. This is Sparks, Georgia, the location of the south end of NS's siding from Sparks to Osgood, and the junction between the NS and the Georgia-Florida Railroad. Because the GNF doesn't run all the way down here very often, NS is your best bet to see any action. The GSNF dispatcher would turn 55V loose as soon as the storm would clear, so we knew we only had to wait a few minutes for him.
Okay to proceed north, looking out for any debris that may be out there by the high winds. Just come through being safe, over.
One thing to note as you listen to the radio is that the dispatcher on this Macon District never calls as the NS dispatch, but rather GSNF dispatcher. This line is ex-GSNF, and instead of using a system like CSX where each dispatcher has his own designation, like the Tampa area's JF dispatcher, the NS uses its own heritage calls, something a little bit charming about this under-the-radar line. The automatic block signal here is simply known as Sparks, and will only light up when a train is approaching and gets very close. And I mean really close. I'm guessing the crew of this 55V probably saw the signal turn on here as they crawled down the hill into the small town.
The 55V clears Sparks.
Norfolk Southern, milepost 137.9, no defects.
Alright, so we're getting off at Lenox. And we have a approach signal for 55V, so we're guessing he's going into the siding.
Norfolk Southern, milepost 115.6, no defects.
We'll see what happens. Well, I'll tell you what happened. We'd pull into the town as the gates came down and a headlight approached, giving us about 10 seconds to spare as we jumped out of the car. This is who 55V would be meeting, southbound freight number 323, with some more BNSF foreign power. Except these engines have been repainted a lot more recently. 323 is daily freight from Macon to the FEC in Jacksonville, interchange to the Class 2's Bowden Yard via McQuaid Street, Duke's Crossing, and the St. Johns River. This train would be huge today, with 2 more motors acting as mid-train distributed power on this 12,000-foot beast. Business is obviously pretty good for the FEC, as apparently this is a normal size for this train lately. When the last of 323 would clear, we had a few minutes to look around the quaint town of Lenox, Georgia. This is where CP Osgood is located, marking the north end of the 2-mile siding that starts back down in Sparks. Incorporated in 1901, Lenox is a small town birthed from the construction of this very rail line, at the time being the Georgia Southern and Florida's main from Macon down to Valdosta, now the NS's Macon District. I've seen Lenox in a few videos of spots along the Norfolk Southern as a peaceful place to watch the trains. With a small downtown and trackside parking lots, I wish I could have spent more time in Lenox, but our grain train has places to be, so only a few minutes after the passing of 323, 55V is back on the move, notching his 2 old locomotives up to track speed. US 41 parallels the NS main from here in Lenox all the way to Tifton, so we'd hit the road as soon as the engines passed. as we wanted to pace the train through the fields and forests that make up this beautiful landscape. About 2 miles north of Lenox would be a straightaway, where we'd catch the two engines at speed. I'll just say this now, this is some of the best pacing footage I've ever gotten of one of the best trains I've ever caught. Through Tifton we'd go, losing ground to count the 35-mile-per-hour speed limit in downtown, but we'd quickly get back up to speed as the chase continued towards Cordele. As the NS continues north from Tifton, there's only a couple of sidings before the main line prepares to cross the CSX and Heart of Georgia shoreline in Cordele. So with a southbound clearing Cordele while we passed through Tifton, a meet was set at Chula, the shortest siding along the Macon District. We'd pull off US 41 just south and around a curve of the south end of the siding, where a hilly straightaway posed a nice photo opportunity. So in a couple minutes, 55V would roll down and back up the hill, preparing to meet southbound train 151, who was approaching the siding from the north. Around the curve, 55V would swing as 151 called a stop at the south end of Chula on the main. The lady at the GSNF dispatcher's desk would be on her game today, as 151 only had to wait a couple minutes before he got signals to depart south, with 55V in the clear. With a green on the distant to Tifton signal, 151, led by an END SD70 Ace, would bank the curve southbound with mixed freight for Valdosta in tow. The short freight train would continue south, notching up to track speed as the N train DPU whizzed by. After taking our time packing up our equipment, we decided to ease on towards Cordele behind the 55V. By the time we had gotten to Ashburn, 55V was right next to us. He had gotten a slow start out of Chula and was finally back up to speed, so with one last shot in mind, we'd pull into the middle of Araby siding, where the grain train wasn't coming out of a stop. He was flying. With our chase of 55V completed amidst the pecan orchards in Araby, we'd roll into Cordele just after sundown, where more action awaited. High green on the CSX northbound holdout signal would tell us of a northbound train coming our way, and with the distant horn and the lowering of the crossing gates along the tracks in downtown, M60112 would appear. This trip, we'll be seeing a lot of these New Orleans freight trains, as there are two pairs of freights that run to and fro Waycross in New Orleans. Now this M601 is heading northbound through Cordele, yet his train symbol and basic knowledge of the location of Waycross in New Orleans shows that this should be a southbound train, and that's because it is. After the selling of the Tallahassee sub from Pensacola to Baldwin, these southbound New Orleans trains have had to leave northbound and out of Waycross to Manchester and LaGrange to access the Lineville subdivision that shoots trains back south towards the Gulf. So these southbound trains with southbound symbols have to briefly run northbound on the Fitz, making for some confusing operations to the uneducated rail fan. I mean, even I had trouble remembering this sometimes. Waiting a few miles north in Ross Siding would be L742, an oddball local that runs south out of the small yard and facilities in Oglethorpe down to Fitzgerald and back north, handling interchange traffic from L739, which gets his cars from the Heart of Georgia Shortline. Recently, this train has had a solo AC44 for power, and today would be no exception, tonight running long hood forward with temporary ditch lights and a very odd horn. With the last bit of twilight giving way to darkness, Norfolk Southern would show up with an Atlanta to Jacksonville intermodal train, number 249. The high shot would be possible via a large pile of ballast placed next to the tracks during this maintenance curfew. As this high-priority intermodal passed, I noticed the two large yellow boxcars situated right behind the locomotives. At first, I thought they might have been some kind of buffer or maybe used for switching purposes when building these trains, but instead it's part of NS and FEC's fast freight philosophy. Since intermodal trains usually go faster than the average freight, the two railroads have reinvented a service design where high-priority freight, usually cars that have a very tight schedule, ride behind the locomotives on intermodal trains, resulting in the cars arriving to their destinations more efficiently. It's an old operation, but it's finding good use on some modern railroads. The evening parade would continue with a unit phosphate train rounding the curve into town. This would be B21111, a loaded phosphate train fresh from the Bone Valley, with two foreign visitors heading back north towards the interchange point of this train in Chicago. It's always nice to see a train from our local area so far along in its journey. It's about 385 miles into its 850-mile trip, but for this crew, they're on their last few hours toward the crew change point in Manchester. Right on B211's markers and running on approaches would be the red-hot IO26, who would end up passing the slower B211 in the Lilly double track. IO26 and its southbound counterpart, IO25, are the hottest trains that run the Fitz, as daily Jacksonville to Chicago intermodal service However, today's train would be delayed a couple of hours due to the Fitz's maintenance curfews, today working on trackage around Rebecca. last train of our eventful day would come just after 9 p.m., as X64710 would diverge out of the siding at Ross and back onto the main southbound towards Waycross. The X prefix is replacing the normal N, representing this Chicago freight as an extra movement. By this point, we'd all be tired, so we'd check into the hotel for the night, excited with anticipation for what the next day would hold. But that's for part 2. So for now, this is Christian from Multicolor Films. End of transmission.